Yeah.
So last 10 seconds, I'm currently an art director for the remote studio LightHouse Films. We're currently working on a small project we're going to take to Cannes Film Festival eventually. But because of that, we have to keep it very hush-hush for now. So I can tell you that it's a passion project by the director, Mark Conrad, who's a good friend of mine, who graduated from the same school that I did, Noman School of VFX in Hollywood. And he basically asked me on the project because he knew I could manage, and he likes to get his friends involved. And it was a project that I had a lot of personal stake in, so I couldn't really say no. And here we are, about a year and a half out, doing pretty cool work with a lot of really nice people. And because we're remote, COVID-19 happily made us reassess some things, but we can still get the job done.
Yeah. Did you have because what are you doing exactly? Are you making a game or a movie or just in general?
It'll be a short animated film.
Okay. And
It'll be
like
3D animation when it's finished. Right now, it's all 2D concept art.
you didn't like get any pushback or like something because of COVID-19, or were you still in the phase where you're developing?
Well, because no, I understand your question. Yeah, we did, because basically, COVID's a reaction. Pardon me. Blah. Let me arrange my thoughts a little bit. The COVID affected everybody, and a lot of people who work for us also work other jobs because we're a small studio, and frankly, we can't offer that much. So we get people on their off hours doing what they can, and that's been really great. But when COVID struck, a lot of people found themselves out of jobs, and that's only multiplying. The entertainment industry is a little shielded right now, just because there is so much demand for content because everybody's stuck indoors. So some of the work is there, but there's still a lot of belt tightening happening, and that it turns into a lot of panic, especially since we had a lot of young artists and student artists that suddenly needed to reassess their options and whether or not they could stay in LA, and setting up their work from home, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're still working through that new scenario, but I'm confident that once the dust is settled, everybody is going to be able to do what they do, because the software they were using was the software that we had kindly donated by Shotgun and a lot of other really cool sponsors for this project. And fortunately, that's all in the cloud, so there's no need to really worry when you can't access you don't need to, sorry, I just trailed off there. You don't need to come into a physical studio to get your work done. And there's no need to. So once everybody's settled back down and knows what they're doing, we'll be able to get started again.
Oh yeah, so you're mainly yeah. Did they really close everything down, or did they like?
Briefly, in LA, do you mean like physically on the street in LA, or for the studio, or?
Well, I was wondering because like I don't see
Yeah.
doing concept art or any art related work, the type of work where you have a lot of contact with people. So I would.
Well, in the studio setup, a lot of studios like cubicles. There's some larger studios that like the pod setup, which is where you are sort of arranged like in multiples in one little section. So you're all in one cubicle, I would say. And that setup has been commented on before this as a real spreader of disease. Like if you're at a large studio that has that setup, and I like won't name any names here, but anybody listening who's in the larger studios knows who I'm talking about. You will, if somebody in your section gets a cold, you will all have a cold by the end of 3 days. It's a mess. A lot of people hate it for that reason, and remotely, fortunately, it saves us a lot of that trouble. There's other stuff, like we have to really plan if we need a meeting, and it does help when we have new people if we can, and now we can't. So, but Zoom and Skype and all these different format platforms let us come together anyway, and basically whenever one of my artists needs me, all we need to do is hop onto Skype for a second. And it's like we can have face-to-face talk about what they're not getting, and that solves a lot of communication issues.
So you're an art director, if I'm, or what?
Yeah, insofar as that's a thing. Because we're so small, it sounds very pretentious to say art director, but there's really no other word for it, so that's what we roll with.
Oh yeah.
It's more like Den Mom, honestly. So we don't get too pretentious around here. Especially we're in the shadow of such bigger companies that most of my peers work for, like WB and DreamWorks TV and DreamWorks. Disney's not that far away from us. Cartoon Network's here. Like there's just bigger names. We're tiny. We're tiny, and we're just a group of like happy fanboys and girls making something that we thought was cool.
Oh yeah. What's the animation about that you're developing? If insofar you can say anything about.
Let me consult my notes, because there's stuff I'm not allowed to tell you because it screws up our chances of taking it to a film festival. So let me take a look. Okay. So this is a very personal project to the director, Mark Conrad, and it's the basic premise, which I can go over with you, is about love, loss, and learning how to move on when you've lost someone. So very human concept.
Yeah. And it's is it like a fully drawn movie, or is it a 3D animation type of
It
thing?
will be 3D. We're as soon as we are done with pre-production, we're going to do some testing in 3D to try to make the 3D effects effectively more organic. We can't be too ambitious. Our budget and just the flexibility of our staff makes it hard to do anything that's going to be too labor intensive. But in that, there's a lot of room for innovation. So we've done a couple of tests. There's a lot of stuff we want to try that's left to do. But right now, it's all pre-production. It's all 2D sketches, and then it will move into 3D. And we're hoping that we can get a little more life and texture and organicness layered back into our 3D. Like the ideal would be something like Paperman, but Paperman, is ambitious in the extreme. But if we can instill that kind of lighting and texture and life, that's what we're shooting for. So if you want a general feel, Paperman's probably the target.
Yeah. So like is there any other is this your first feature film?
It's yeah, though it wouldn't be a feature film, just a small film.
Yeah.
Just a short film. This is my first short film. I've worked on the feature Troll Bridge for Snowgun Films. I was an animator for them. And I worked on the principal character, Micah. So that was a huge remote project that was really well coordinated by Daniel Knight and a lot of other good people over at Snowgum, and they're in Australia. So you can imagine coordinating the time zones for that.
Yeah. Well, I
But
think time zones are usually kind of. I don't know. I haven't had many problems with people in different time zones, but it can. I don't know why. Sometimes it happens.
I mean, when you're coordinating more than one, I think that's where it gets kind of sketchy.
Yeah.
And they're not concurrent. They're not like right alongside each other. Then it gets a little messy, but that's all right. They managed brilliantly. It was my first experience with Shotgun, which was a really interesting studio organization software, which basically, I mean, it's Dropbox's big brother in effect, but I'm really underselling it by saying that. If you've not had experience with it, it's really awesome stuff. Sorry, apparently I can't talk and draw at the same time, so I'm just gonna flip back to this other one in Noodle, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Ned, go ahead. I'm doing Blender at the same time as well, so it's kind of
fantastic. No problemo. So,
yeah. Are you mainly like a 2D artist, or do you? Because I see you do cover art and storyboards and those types of.
I went to school for 3D. That Nomen is pretty much primarily 3D school, so I can. But my first love is traditional and 2D. Like for now, to pick up some of the slack caused by COVID, I've been freelancing into portrait art, and that's like rolling off a log for me. It's very easy. So there's a temptation not to do it. If you understand my meaning, there's always this push with artists to make things a little harder for ourselves. It's like if you're doing something easily, it's not good enough. So you have to do something else to make it to challenge yourself and make it worthwhile.
Yeah, that's something that I've heard quite a few times. It's like always when someone's like a 3D artist, they come to a realization that 3D sucks and that 2D is where it's all at. And like I'm like myself a 2D, come from 2D, and I've heard other people who do 2D, and then it's like 2D sucks and we have to go into 3D because it's all too slow. And it's like quite often that people go towards the other, the other thing than the thing that they're
yeah, I mean, I can't. Everybody will, march to their own drum, and I think that's fine. And a lot of what we're getting nowadays is a fusion of 2 and 3D, which I think is getting the best of both worlds. And the software is really adapting to make it easier for someone to not be technologically inclined, but still be a brilliant artist inside of the 3D software. And that's been really astounding to see. Like Substance Painter is a great example of where it's just become powerful enough and simplified enough that you don't need an extensive 3D background to understand how it has to work. Real-time lighting engines, same thing. Like they're just getting simpler and simpler. Things that used to take, just when I was in school, some 5 years ago, it would take us hours and hours to set up correctly. By the time I was out of Nomen, the new software coming down the pipe was making everything look game ready inside of 2 or 3 hours. It was incredible, and I'm all for that advancement. I am less for the idea that, which was how 3D was originally conceived, which is about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we paid less people and did a less good job and copied all of these animations into software So we just have to have one person pushing a button at the end of it. That is not why any artist gets into the business. We're not looking to get replaced by something that's not, it's not going to do a good job. It's just going to do an acceptable job.
Yeah, myself, I started getting into AI and like deep learning stuff because I could quite clearly see that like the pushing of the button might, I think of course pushing the button might be a simplified way of saying it, but I'm definitely thinking that a lot of art and animation might be becoming more of a thing where you just say to your computer the story you want to see play out, and that it generates it by itself. And I find that quite that's quite, well, it's kind of scary in a way, because it's like
dehumanizing.
Yeah, and it's like the destruction of a very large industry that you look up to and like. Yeah.
The exploitation of it, certainly. And I mean, it's a little dramatic because art has always been historically exploited for many different purposes: propaganda, entertainment, personal agendas, and that's nothing new. But when the artist themselves is being replaced by a machine, I mean, AI has a lot of fascinating possibilities, including the ability to make our lives easier, to make, basically to make the animation world less hideous. Because I'm not sure, like, what your personal experience, studio experience is right now. Like, are you just out of school? Are you, like, where are you at in the process, I guess?
I've gone into school on and off. I couldn't really, because I think mainly every school I went to, I always had like that thing in my mind, like a lot of this stuff is like not going to make me any money. It's not going to, a lot of it is going to disappear. It's going to, but so I quit. I just went on a kind of like a journey of going from one thing to the next, trying to figure things out. And now I'm more like developing a business. But of course, COVID kind of threw
a kibosh on that.
Yeah, that was. But I'm still just going in that direction. I think I'm probably going to go into a more, well, one, I want to start a brand, and two, I want to go into more of an engineering type of stuff, because that's like AI and deep learning and those things, like building robots, is definitely something I want to get into. Or
if you're technically inclined, that's certainly the wave of the future. There's more expansion inside of AI and data science right now than I think any other field, unless medical research is something you're inclined to, because I think there's going to be a lot of room there in the coming decades, seeing how this virus really snuck up on the Western world and bit in butt. I am pleased to see research move forward there. But yeah, no, I certainly feel you, and that sentiment is certainly echoed here across the pond. Basically, we're seeing a drive only to make animation cheaper from the larger studios. It's increased the profitability of it without really knowing how to do so. So it's a very narrow approach that generally puts a lot of suffering on the artist. Like, I mean, let's put some themes out there. I have visited several major studios. There is no studio in LA that doesn't have liquor just standing around. My graduating speech from Noman was effectively, you guys will be, if you're not an alcoholic now, you will be when you're finished. And that's the kind of mentality I would like to remove, the idea that it has to be a miserable experience for you to be a real artist. There's way too much of that. It's causing serious problems. Basically, right now, it's unrealistic to expect that you're going to have a real family or any kind of meaningful relationship outside of the studio, because you will not have the time. So a lot of good studios will let their artists take sabbaticals and come back. A lot of places don't do that, but the understanding is that while you're there, you belong to the studio, and a reasonable work-life balance is not going to happen. While there's a project on, you're in the project and there's no going home. Not really.
Yeah.
So it's very commercial. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to talk anybody out of getting into animation. I am an advocate for your approach, actually. I deeply regret not taking classes on an individual basis to try to figure out which school would have been the best fit for me. There's a real, I don't think I'm telling anybody news when I say school in the US is very expensive. Like, I'm pretty sure everybody knows this. Am I correct in assuming this?
In contrast to Europe is free, so, well, technically free.
So anything would be more expensive. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I took a semester abroad in Amsterdam and studied at Garrett Reedville, and that was a really cool experience. But I viscerally recall how I was not believed when I told them how much school costs per semester in the US for just a standard four-year college. They were flabbergasted and thought I'd done the conversions wrong, and I'm like, no. For Nomen cost, if I remember correctly, something like 24,000 a term. That's US dollars. So in euros, it would be slightly less, but in the same ballpark.
Yeah, what I was, one of the things that's a contrast with Europe. In Europe, everything is, I think the reason in Europe, especially when it comes to art education, there's such a difference is, like, we already have so much art, I think, and the quality of art schools here aren't as good as they were in the past, because we don't really need more art, and we get like a lot of American, if we look at art, we see, movies and all those things. The quality of American education is a lot. It's very high, yeah.
But it comes at a very deep price that I would like to see eliminated. And I think a lot of players in online and podcasters have actually changed the map a lot in that respect, because offering any kind of class or study online from experienced artists is basically all an artist needs to get along with. You can educate yourself now on Maya if you just take tutorials online. You can educate yourself on most render software if you just take tutorials online. Yeah, the first generation of people offering those courses did study at a school, but a lot of it was figuring it out on their own, and then they offer classes in their own right. And I would love to see the current for-profit school market dissolve, just because real artists who are good teachers have made their presence on YouTube or other platforms. It's better for the students because they can learn at their own pace. It's better for instructors because they can pursue their work on their terms and keep growing and changing, and not basically sacrifice the time they need to advance by having to make a living teaching, which is often not very lucrative here, which is hilarious because the schools are so expensive, but the teachers are usually the worst paid, aside from like the cleaning staff. So you have to completely immerse yourself in teaching if you're going to make a go at it. And honestly, teaching is usually more lucrative than actually being an artist for a lot of people. We go back into teaching to try to have some kind of stable income, and that also has to stop. There's been some momentum there, and stop me if I'm rambling because I'm just going to keep jumping from topic to topic. But one very notable advance we had in terms of work-life balance and artists having a committed time, I should probably back up and say that most artists in the US, especially in entertainment, work on a contract basis. When you're done, you're done. When the studio says you're done, you will be removed from the premises very abruptly. It doesn't always happen now, but it's a thing that can happen, especially when game studios get finished and the whole art team rolls off. They can do things like give you 30 minutes to clear the building with your belongings, which is pretty dehumanizing. But something that no artist really has is my job going to be there tomorrow? There's no security in that, even though you're working on enormous properties. There's a lot of at-will to work contracts, which means you can be laid off at any time. You will not receive any kind of compensation or unemployment. So this industry has a lot of fear attached to it, and I'd love to see that change. And ironically, Rick and Morty made that first move toward real change, at least in this decade, because they were able, basically because they were already so successful, they were enjoying more monetary success than any other series has for a long time. They were able to twist the studio's arm into committing to several more seasons so the artists knew where their bread and butter was coming from, which shouldn't have been revolutionary, but it was. And I want to hope that this would be a model for the future, that studios will look at that and go, we didn't actually suffer for doing this. We still made a killing on this really very profitable property. But my experience with studios is they'll take just the opposite. They allowed some director to strong arm them, and the responsibility to get rid of directors. So this is a cynical view. I apologize. You get to see a lot of ugly when you're on the periphery for a while, and it's a lot of people get very damaged by the system. A lot of artists who should have been picked up never are, for one reason or another. They don't fit the studio mold, and and they do good work. Like Netflix and Disney, no one's going to argue that those properties weren't beautiful to see, worthwhile to develop, but then you see things like Netflix has a very strict tone that it wants its people to adhere to. You have to read through a sort of identity packet before you can work for them, and to make sure that you're basically adhering to the company culture. And there you see a lot of moves toward company culture and assimilation, and that being more important than the work and more important than the artist. And there's an idea that you should take pain and like it, and I refuse. I think that's very counterproductive, and it's not something I'll ever demand of my artists. And I hope that the ability now to work remotely makes that not only nobody wants to enforce that, it is unenforceable. If you're doing your your greatest work on your own computer in your pajamas, fantastic. There's no need now for enormous, unwieldy pipelines that are dealing with contractors that are, miles away, and you have to speak 3 different languages in order to coordinate. There's plenty of talented people in your locality and you can get a film that would never have seen the light of day out into the world because it didn't have to go through 30 million executives trying to say, basically all saying, where's the profit in it? And so I'm really hoping that this software that lets us all communicate and work wherever we want to work is going to lead to seeing properties in countries that say are very dismissive of artists, countries that are downright hostile towards new content that hasn't been approved by the state. You think of the stories that haven't seen the light of day just because someone thought it wasn't going to make money. It's like, well, let's find out. Now we can. Now it's just about your internal drive and about the ability to coordinate. I think that's only a good. And of course, sometimes can you get the money? And crowdfunding is a great place to go for that too. Crowdsourced revenue has certainly changed the map a lot too.
Have you done crowdfunding?
I have not. Frankly, we don't have the numbers to make it worthwhile yet in terms of media attention and so forth. We're just quiet guys who are effectively friends of Mark or friends of mine, or people that saw us doing something and went, I really want to be part of this. So we get a lot of talented professionals, and we didn't really need to crowdfund. There's just people donating their time more often than not. And that makes so far that's made really good art. I've got no complaints. But as far as crowdfunding goes, I've had a lot of people crowdfund with my work, and that's usually for comics. And with limited success, because it takes a lot of legwork in the background to bring attention to any kind of fundraiser like that. They often do not succeed.
Yeah.
And that's usually not about the value of the product. It's just about whether you were well advertised enough. So that can be a bit of a heartbreak, but that's how it is. You always need a media person, especially going forward, because people's content is very diversified. And to make sure you're reaching the right people, you have to really be on the media presence, which it's just not a stage we're at, fortunately. We'll worry about that when we get to it. We didn't need to do that in order to get the people we've got, so that's been great. It helps that we're in the Hollywood media circuit, I guess. Like the people I know on LinkedIn are the people that are already in film and media. So it's like, hey, I know you, so-and-so talked about you. We're doing this thing. Come on board. And that's usually how you get work here. It's going to be someone knows your work and can vouch for you. Because no one wants to work with, let's say, someone with an unlovely personality. And no one wants to work with somebody who can't work, or they have to train, or because it's not tenable. You already have a hard enough job.
Yeah.
This poor Drake is just all over the map. Here, put that in.
So you're drawing a dragon?
Yeah.
Or is it like?
Mostly I'm just noodling, because, like I said, talking and drawing is something I do not well. And I got that. It's my story, I'm sticking to it. Pull him up. lay down layers until I like it, basically. There we go. But yeah, sorry, I rambled on for quite a bit.
No, rambling is great, but like I definitely agree with the not being capable of drawing, and I wonder why that is, because a lot of the work seems sometimes you're capable of listening to something, but like talking is usually maybe because it takes your thoughts.
Your creative energy.
Yeah.
It's quite possible.
I'm drawing.
It just requires too much focus. Because I've been drawing while somebody was ambiently talking, and answering them was no problem. But the minute I have to talk while I'm also working, it gets pretty difficult.
So what is like you talked about the industry and the different companies. Is there? I know there's companies here. There aren't many. They're not. I usually when I refer to Europe, I'm going to say like they're not. There are few and they're not good, but there are, of course.
You
very
have
nice.
Legit studios have turned out really well-known products. Like Guerrilla Games is one I know in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
They're pretty established at this point. Trying to remember.
I think like CD Projekt Red is like European, and the guys from Crysis, I think. I don't remember which studio makes Crysis, but I believe it's a Stockholm, Swedish company.
It's true. There are a couple of small up-and-comers in the former Czech Republic and Slovakia and Turkey and Italy. There's game studios. Let me see. There are certainly several, like Rockstar Games, and it has a division here and also in Britain. There's a couple in Sweden. I believe there's a couple in Norway. So there's definitely opportunity there, but because there's generally fewer, and I think it's harder to fundraise for a startup in Europe is my impression. I could be wrong, but that capital has to be a lot more justified before that company can form. So there's a lot of companies that just don't make it or consolidate or just don't have a successful enough project in their first year, and then they have to close. So there's a lot less actually starting and a lot less surviving in the European market, which is a shame, because I think the stuff that has been successful is very good. I mean, hell, I think the Angry Birds movie was developed in Sweden. I know it was.
What is that? I don't know. I'm not into mobile games, so that's like a market that I don't know much about. But it's
going to be the growing market, I think, because of just the accessibility of the platform.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing a Facebook game, but I'm not. There aren't many Facebook games that are like anything. They're usually like puzzle games and stuff. I really want to make a 3D game that's like something. I don't know.
That works on a mobile platform, or were you thinking something?
I was thinking doing some sort of cross, something that's like something you can access from your phone and play on your phone, but also play on your computer. Maybe the features will be minimized and on the phone, of course, but something of a 3D MMO RPG type of game.
I think there would be a market for that. It's just about a concept that's worth doing, that gets people engaged. And honestly, that side of it can be harder to come by.
Yeah.
But it's certainly worth pursuing. It's just hard when you're a student alone to get a team together and to keep a team together.
Well, usually, because I'm kind of tired, but so I've been dozing off. Well, and I'm modeling in Blender, but usually I ask like a question of like, how do you see the future, and what I mean with the future, it doesn't have to be something general. It doesn't have to be even futuristic, but like it might be even be in respect to like the industry, or where games are going, movies are going, whatever you'd like. Like, how do you see the future? Like, where are we going?
Well, and let's try to cover the we's that we could possibly cover here for whose future. I think that a lot, given Brexit, a lot of UK-based gaming is going to shut down because they were reliant on people from the EU in order to make those studios functional. So either they're going to try to save themselves by recruiting almost entirely from the US or in a huge proportion from the US, which they were already doing. But basically, when Brexit started to become a reality, a lot of game studios in the UK suddenly had enormous amounts of job posting. Just people must have been jumping ship like mad. So that was a thing that will certainly affect the game industry there. So it's hard to know how the chips will eventually fall. But it's certainly a struggle for them now to cope, I believe, with the fallout from Brexit. With the same thing with the EU. Because of the financial fallout, I don't know if there's going to be studios starting. There's certainly going to be a glut of people that came back. But whether or not they're going to be able to find game or entertainment jobs again is up in the air. In the US, there's been a huge move to outsource, basically to make things as cheap as possible by outsourcing it to other who we just don't have to pay as much as American artists and don't have the same kind of labor laws. And so far as we have labor laws, we basically have nothing on the order of the US labor laws. And that makes not only studios battle for more and more money, but it makes artists compete with each other to get jobs. Like, I've been up for jobs that I know I'm not going to get because I was in the interview room with people who were teachers of mine who have 15 years of experience. They should not have to ever compete for beginners' jobs, and they do. That's just the reality. Because at the end of the day, when there's just not that many jobs to go around because they're going overseas, there's the people who have the experience, who should be able to demand more money, can't, and they'll accept lower wages. And there's no fault there except with the studios who have the cash but just won't pay. So I'm hopeful that remote studios and content will have its own niche away from larger studios, because we frankly don't have the money to compete inside of larger platforms, larger streaming platforms. We can throw our stuff on YouTube and similar and present it to Canis, and somebody with a distribution picks it up. So as soon as that's able to change, that'll be basically the final step in making independent studios truly reliant only on themselves But as far as how the U.S. goes, it's really going to depend on how we pull out of this crisis, because we're managing it about the worst that it can be managed. And that's going to really affect all ability for development going forward. And that's not, like, no one wants to contemplate the Mad Max apocalypse that this could become. But it could get pretty dire if things don't change. Like, we could be seeing the final slip into a nation state we don't really want to contemplate. But honestly, it has been coming for some time. Or it could be the start of a better change, or essentially a change for the better. And we really don't know yet. I'm not sure how much content for American politics and protests is actually making it to Europe right now, because I was aghast during the Bush administration how little of American dissent made it out of the United States just via CNN and Fox News. So I'm not sure what Europe is seeing of America, but what I have seen has been very heartening. But we're going through a lot of change right now, and that's going to be reflected in our art, and that's going to be reflected in our media, and we'll have to see whether we can put things back together well enough to move forward and be basically part of the globe again. So I tried to make that answer as comprehensive as I could.
Yeah, no, definitely. I very much understood, but like, I don't, I like to see it in a positive. I think in 2008 we saw the financial crisis, and of course there was like a lot of damage, but in the end, people go through a lot, and we're still here. So
yeah, I mean, the survival of people, I have no doubt we are going to, like, well, when in the face of something like COVID, a lot of things have to change. And fortunately, Europe doesn't seem to put the same commercial value on human life. Like, when this started happening, there was a lot of talk about how the economy needs to be fixed and how people need to go back out and do their jobs. Not a lot of being said for protecting citizens, and basically lives in themselves are not being viewed as a resource right now by our leadership, and that's a problem. A serious problem that will make further problems if it's not addressed. And yeah, it's a perspective that's being echoed in workers' lives. It's not surprising to me that people are coming to harm here because it's effectively cheaper to let us die, because that was more or less the perspective already. And that makes for a very dire circumstance in an emergency situation like there is now.
Yeah, I know the American system somewhat, but I don't fully. Of course, I don't live in America, so that's
yeah, good on you. And I don't live in Belgium, so I don't know. I know that it's become bad in sections of the EU. I know that Germany was staying ahead of the problem, tried a soft open, and immediately got smashed with a lot more COVID numbers. Right now, the fatalities for California alone are at 4,000 and change. And the wider U.S., it's creeping toward 110,000. And I may be behind with those numbers. And that's just fatalities from known COVID cases. And we're certainly not testing to this level that South Korea or Taiwan is. And so it's very much a citizens' fight, because a lot of people feel that they've been abandoned by the system for years. And now we have to protect ourselves and each other. So there's a lot of ground level organization, there's a lot of state level organization, but we're not receiving a lot of help from the Fed, which is basically where the Fed is basically, the only purpose of it is to help on a national scale. So when something happens on a national scale, it can be addressed. And that kind of support and relief is just not happening. And that's not surprising, but it is the reality. And so that affects everybody, entertainment, medical, all of it. We're all tied together in a way that we haven't really seen before. And I think that can drive some really good things. But it also makes a lot of turmoil when everybody's being affected at all times.
Yeah.
And I would be curious to hear what's going on in Belgium, like what the response has been, because.
Well, to me it seemed all pretty, I don't know. I'm mainly, trying to enhance my portfolio and doing art and stuff, so my life hasn't changed dramatically. But
I mean, that's good.
I think I don't know. It seems not very. Of course, one of the things, I used to have friends that came over and stuff. That's kind of
different.
Yeah, was a lot less. But I don't know. I don't know if I know that everything is opening now, but of course I'm not in contact or not seeing the people that I used to see before, so I don't know what they are doing or how they are going or what their problems are. So mainly the media would be my source of knowing anything, but I don't watch the news very much. I'm usually doing tutorials or just even though I did have I started this podcast. I started talking to people a lot more online, just mainly. So I don't know. People seem busier than ever. They're just going about their day. I did see in America, when I look at my Facebook, I have like a lot of American friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more complicated there. It seems to me there's a lot more people. Well, I don't know, going on the streets and protesting, but that might also be partly the guy that was shot, the black
George
guy.
Floyd.
Yeah.
Well, that because a lot of people are unemployed now, it's something that we've always needed to address, but now there is increasing unrest and ability. Like, basically, if you've been laid off your job, there's uncertainty in your life anyway, and you might as well try to do your best to change the world for the better, since it's only gotten worse for you. So a lot of people are using their time when they don't have a job to affect that change, and I've been really pleased to see it. And as unemployment numbers grow, because the real mean in unemployment in the US right now is probably about 40%, and that's numbers only going to rise. And that's kind of what I mean by nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, because we do not know how these chips are going to fall yet, and anybody who says they do is speculating. Which is a fancy way of saying they are lying. They're making their best guess. But these unemployment numbers, the last time we had anything like them was the Great Depression. And FDR eventually implemented the New Deal. And sorry, I almost misspoke and said what the legislation that's on the slate now to be proposed. And it would take something that drastic in order to affect change. And even then, it's going to be a hard slog for people to be financially stable and protected again. And they haven't been for a very, very long time, for the majority of the US, I should say. We do have absurdly wealthy people here, and that's part of our issue that we need to deal with. Sorry, I kind of shut off on a tangent there, but the ultimate effect of this has been is people have been trying to protest peacefully and make effective change now that they don't have to work 3 jobs because they've been laid off of all of them in order to make ends meet. They have some time to do the things they would have always done if they didn't have to put food on the table. Because that's the thing of it, is civil protest gets very difficult in the US because if you are not of like the highest class, you have to work all the time. It's not, I know there's a great myth of the American spirit that we love to work all the time, and because we work, we're wealthier, and it's not a real thing. It's a lot of people not being paid enough to have any kind of leisure time. You would have to finish your 8-hour shift and move on to the next shift at another job. There's a lot of that. And it makes things like civil protests very, very difficult. But now there's nothing else to do. So you're going to try to go out and make the streets safer for people, for other citizens. And that's been really, really cool seeing. Not to get too political on you, because I don't think that the idea that cops shouldn't kneel on your head is a controversial statement, or simply murder people out of hand, because that's always been an issue here. It's not a new thing. It's just a thing that's finally getting addressed now, and I'm really pleased about it.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Sorry if I just turned this on its nose a little bit.
Yeah, I do think shooting and killing people is something that happens a lot less here in Europe, even though we do have like major wars. I know there's been American wars as well, but they have them happen sometimes. Well, American history is a lot shorter than, well, technically dependent on what you think of American history. If you're discounting everything before colonization, but yeah,
and well put, by the way. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what develops. Right now, there's a lot of unrest. Excuse me, stretching. There we go. But we've gone through periods of unrest before. It's just usually not organized on this level, which has been great because there's a lot. It's easy to think of problems as isolated when we're not communicating with each other, and the internet has made possible a lot of really good organization for these groups. Like, there's a lot with change now that people can coordinate with. I mean, it makes for bad too, because basically white supremacists can talk to each other on a level that they weren't able to before. And turns out they can use the internet as well. And that's been an issue we have to address. And fortunately, it's countered by the fact that protesters can do things like, hey, wear your mask. Hey, we're keeping this protest peaceful, and please police anybody that you see trying to incite a riot. And it makes the message much more effective. Now we still have to fight our certain branches of the media that have their own agenda. And a large portion of our population isn't receiving the same news, and that's a problem.
Mm.
but on the average, we're communicating more than we ever have before. And I have to think that that will affect change for the better in the end. It's just going to be a matter of how far from now, and how good will it be for the majority of people.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's just the question. I think that's been everybody's questions throughout history for just about anywhere is how's it going to look in the future? How's it going to look for people like me?
Yeah. I guess the future will tell itself, and we'll see. But I definitely.
Well,
Do you have any other like stories that are more
art related?
art related? Yeah.
Sure. Well, let's see. My parents are both artists. I'm from an art family, and that was why they did not want me to go into the arts. It's a very uncertain proposition, and not something you want for your kids when you've had deep experience in the art world, at least not in the US, and probably not in the EU generally. I don't know if they have the same like low opinion of artists generally. Like, why don't you get a real job? I don't know if you've heard any sentiment like that.
No, that's one of the things that I don't hear here like
I mean,
often.
that's fantastic in itself. Like, I'd move there in a heartbeat. Just basically, there's a view among especially business oriented people that artists are effectively parasites or a necessary evil. You'll deal with them because there's no other way to get content, but they're not worth dealing with. So my folks have both been in commercial art and art education for a long time. And when I was a good artist as a kid, but it was basically like, yeah, be a really good artist. We're really, really pleased that you're good at it. Don't consider this as a job. This is not a viable or job where you'll have steady income or any kind of stability at all. And I didn't listen to that message. It was basically all I wanted to do was draw. And there, here I am. Really, it's been a long, winding path, and traditional. And I got out of school just as the Depression hit full force. I graduated with my bachelor's in '09. So basically, it was just long enough for the economy's crash to be in full swing. So no one was hiring. And a lot of people who had been laid off went back to school to get an advanced degree. So a lot of people that had their BFA went back to school and got their master's so they could hopefully get a teaching position. So there was a dearth of availability in higher level university. So that path was out for me, but there was availability in small for-profit private schools that are effectively very practical training. So Noman was one of these schools where they effectively train you in a professional as a professional 3D artist. And I'm like, cool, this is where I see it going. Let's do that. And basically, you're trying to get ahead of an industry being put overseas, and that can be problematic because more and more people are being trained in other countries, in Canada, in China, elsewhere. And studios really like to partner with them because there's incredible subsidies for that work in Canada, so the studios don't have to pay. And in China, between the subsidies and the the conversion difference with cash and just the fact that people can be paid less, makes it a very appealing prospect for studios who are trying to make money any way they can. So the industry's collapsing here, and you're trying to get a job while there's less and less jobs to go around. So it's basically trying to adapt as fast as the world is changing around you has been a perpetual challenge. And I like to think I've done well, but honestly, and most of it's been sheer luck and knowing good people and adapting to anything I could turn my hand to. Because as far as the LA art world, I am not exceptional in any shape or form. There are brilliant artists here. There's a lot of brilliant artists here. And it's very hard to put yourself in a position where you can claim that you do something differently from someone else, and have that be an attractive prospect for a studio. Like, it's basically, you get hired now because you know somebody, or someone you can look at your work and say that will make money, and getting that right, that combination, that winning lotto ticket is exceedingly hard. Because often your portfolio is being looked at by HR, and HR might know a lot about the art world or might not. And like one of my buddies who was accepted at a major studio, who's a brilliant artist, and he should have been, like, he was talented from day one and was a fantastic 3D renderer and modeler. But he got accepted because they were looking for somebody who could make islands, and he just happened to have islands on his portfolio. That's the kind of barrier you have to jump in order to get a real job in the arts. And my folks knew that of old. It was just a different kind of inability to see artistic potential because you're not being interviewed by anybody who's remotely fluent in art. So they were like, they didn't want that for me, and they didn't want that kind of difficulty, which I can understand. Because I certainly have days where I look back and go, was this worth it? Sure, maybe I should have gotten into advertising. And, I did get into advertising for a while. So, not quite as fun as drawing dragons on my own time. I did work for a little studio in Thiensville. That's a little tiny town in Wisconsin. And I made whiteboard videos. It's the kind of animation where you see somebody draw in real time and then the drawing is animated. I don't know if that's a thing that translates very well. It's kind of I think it's an American phenomenon. It's usually demonstration videos and so forth.
Which name was it?
It's called Whiteboard Animation. It was for a teeny company called Storyvision Video in Thiensville. There's just me and the boss and the office secretary. Very small.
Yeah, I didn't. I want to say that it rings a bell, but I don't think it's.
No. It shouldn't. It's an unknown. But whiteboard animation is just instructional videos and ads that are usually, like, we did an internal video for the UN once, just to help them with their HR staffing issues. Like this, they're little, if you ever get brought into a company and there's a little code of conduct tutorial you have to watch or something, that's what that was. We did little stuff like that, and it was fun, but it was a contract job, and so I was working 4 other jobs to make ends meet, and that's not the most creative environment to be in, unfortunately. And so I eventually got accepted to Noman, and that was in 2013. I came out here, and that was really cool because I had basically lived east of the Mississippi, but I'd never been able to live as far out as California. and California is great. I really enjoy LA. The food here is incredible, especially after being in Wisconsin, because I moved from Tampa to Chicago, and I moved back and forth from Florida to Chicago to Ohio and Georgia when I was a kid. And that makes for a real diverse cuisine and diverse culture and a lot of really cool things to see. And then 2 years I'm going to college in Wisconsin, and the culture is a lot more flat, I guess. It's not as diverse. So getting something like a spicy burrito is not going to happen for you in most of Wisconsin. So it was a bit of a culture shock for me, especially after growing up in Chicago. But I did get into the smaller scene. I met some amazing artists. In fact, Renee Graff, who I've worked with on the children's book, the Lulu and Rocky series, Lulu and Rocky in Milwaukee and Lulu and Rocky in Detroit. I was her assistant for those, and Renee is from the Milwaukee art scene, and she's a really gifted illustrator, and she started in a time where it was very, very hard for women to be commercial illustrators. That was probably another reason my mom did not want me to be an artist, because it was a very misogynistic world for a long time, and especially when she was coming up. It was made very clear to her by one professor that she was not going to be able to achieve a master's in fine arts because they would never give her anything but a C, even though she's exceedingly talented and still is. So she would never have been able to achieve a master's degree. So she got hers in anthropology and the humanities. But she was basically blocked out from advancing in the arts world. And I think there was some fear there that I would face the same thing. And I got to say, in entertainment, it is an issue and it is a problem. It's more insidious. It's never been too very confrontational, but there's basically the abuse stories and the reasons you hear of Pixar execs being knocked down after being, molesting people for years and stuff like that. It's no news to any woman in the industry because you've been through it at least once. And puts a different flavor on the trials and tribulations of being a commercial artist or being an entertainment artist.
Yeah.
There's that complexion to things. And all in all, I think it's been a hard but rewarding experience. I've certainly got my issues with my education with how I went about it, that I would change if I could. For instance, I rather like your approach of taking a class and seeing if it's for you and moving forward with it. I think that was a really brilliant idea that we should really put out to more students or would-be students getting out of secondary school and ready to move on to graduate classes, is that why don't you take a course and see if it's for you, see if it's the thing you want, and see if you see a future at the end of it. Because right now there's an idea that you're only going to get funding if you're going to commit to 2 or 4 years of something that's may not be the best thing for you or anyone. It may not leave you with any actual applicable skills at the end. And when the internet is right there waiting to be used, it really raises a question of, are schools going to change fast enough? And are they going to be valid in the future? Until now, I think it's been, yes, they're still valid because you have been brought together with a group of other artists who have the same goals, and you can assist each other in a way it's hard to accomplish in a remote sense. But as the technology changes, the ability to have a group experience with people who are on the other side of the globe, and our ability to truly communicate with each other and empathize with each other and build something together is just going to get better. So I think that bodes well.
Definitely. Well, I'm thinking maybe we could end the episode here.
Sounds good.
Maybe we will talk again at some point.
I'm pleased that you would want to.
Yeah, sure. It was definitely nice talking.
I'm so glad. I hope this will be a good episode for you, man.
Yeah, definitely. I'm 100% convinced that there's nothing going to be wrong right now, but I have had some difficulties with recording. But
well, it's sooner difficulty with recording than with me. It's like, oh, I don't think any of this content is usable, so.
Wow. You know, I'm just figuring things out, putting episodes online, and as I move forward and grow, you know, the quality is I don't think there's going to be much wrong with the quality right now. It's definitely, quality wise, was one of the better ones, I think.
Grand. I really appreciate you reaching out and the courage it takes to do that into the wide void of the internet and talk to this person you've never spoken with before.
Yeah. No, but it was definitely worthwhile. So I'll see you sometime, or we'll chat sometime. But I'm gonna end the call, and then we'll see each other.
Well, you have a good day, man, and yeah, happy casting.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.